When Olivia Wellington walked into the Providence Municipal Court that morning, she carried no sense of urgency or concern. To her, the courthouse felt like another administrative building, quiet, predictable, and manageable. In her experience, inconveniences rarely lasted long. Paperwork could be handled, fines could be paid, and situations could be resolved with a few phone calls. That belief had followed her through much of her life. Olivia had grown up surrounded by comfort and access. Her family name was well known across the city, often spoken with respect and influence. Doors opened easily, problems softened quickly, and consequences rarely lingered. She had learned, consciously or not, that status created distance between mistakes and accountability. What she did not realize was that this courtroom operated under a different currency. Here, wealth did not speak louder than conduct. Here, titles and connections held no special weight. Within minutes, Olivia would begin to understand that the courtroom was not a service counter. It was a place where responsibility stood front and center. This was not just a legal proceeding. It was a moment where belief systems quietly collided with reality. The court clerk called Olivia's case in a practiced, neutral tone, one shaped by years of repetition and fairness. As Olivia approached the defendant's table, her attention remained on her phone. It was a small detail, but in a courtroom, small details matter. They reflect attitude, awareness, and respect for the process. Judge Frank Caprio looked up from the bench and calmly asked Olivia to state her full name for the record. His voice was steady, not confrontational. When her response came without eye contact, the judge paused. He reminded her, politely but firmly, that when someone stands before the court, their full attention is expected. This was not about authority for authority's sake. It was about mutual respect. Courtrooms depend on it. Every person who walks through those doors, regardless of background, deserves to be heard and taken seriously. That same respect is also expected in return. The moment was subtle, yet meaningful. It set the tone for everything that followed. As the charges were formally read into the record, the atmosphere inside the courtroom subtly changed. What initially appeared to be a routine traffic matter revealed deeper seriousness when the location of the violation was clarified. Olivia had been cited for driving well above the speed limit in an active school zone. In American communities, school zones carry a special responsibility. They are designed around the assumption that drivers will exercise extra caution because children, often distracted, unpredictable, and trusting, are present. The officer's testimony was calm, professional, and precise. He described the time of day, the speed recorded, and the fact that children were visible nearby. There was no attempt to dramatize the situation, only to present it accurately. In court, credibility often lies not in emotion, but in consistency. The facts alone were enough to illustrate the risk involved. Judge Caprio listened carefully, understanding that traffic laws are among the most commonly broken and most underestimated laws in the country. Yet these violations account for countless preventable tragedies each year. Speeding, especially in designated safety zones, is not simply a personal choice. It is a decision that affects an entire community. The courtroom's role is to confront that reality before harm occurs, not after. For Olivia, this moment marked the first time her actions were being examined not as an inconvenience, but as a public concern. The law was not focused on who she was, but on what she did, and who could have been affected. That distinction is central to the justice system. It ensures that consequences are tied to conduct, not identity. In that sense, the reading of the charges was more than procedural. It was a reminder that every driver shares responsibility for the safety of others, especially in spaces meant to protect children. When the court reviewed Olivia's driving history, a broader context began to emerge. This was not her first encounter with traffic enforcement. Previous violations had occurred within a relatively short period, including incidents in similarly sensitive areas. However, what stood out was not just the number of citations, but the manner in which they had been resolved. Each time, the matter was handled without Olivia ever appearing personally before a judge. Judge Caprio approached this history thoughtfully. He did not frame it as a list of past mistakes, but as an explanation for the present moment. When accountability is consistently managed by others, through attorneys, payments, or influence, the individual loses an opportunity to reflect. Consequences become abstract, detached from behavior. Over time, this separation can quietly reinforce the belief that rules are flexible rather than firm. The judge noted that appearing in court is not meant to shame or intimidate. It serves an important civic function. Standing before the law forces individuals to acknowledge how their choices intersect with community standards. It humanizes responsibility. Without that experience, lessons remain theoretical, and behavior rarely changes. For Olivia, this realization came late, but not too late. The court was not revisiting her past to reopen closed cases. It was acknowledging how repeated avoidance of personal accountability had shaped her expectations. This was not presented as a moral failure, but as a gap in experience, one that the court now had an obligation to address. In the American justice system, fairness does not mean ignoring patterns, nor does it mean punishing history. It means recognizing when intervention is necessary to prevent repetition. By bringing Olivia face to face with the process, the court aimed to restore a balance that had been missing, not through harshness, but through direct engagement with responsibility. When Judge Caprio asked Olivia why she was driving at such a high speed, her response was simple and familiar. She said she was running late. It was an answer heard in courtrooms across the country every day. People rushed to work, appointments, or social plans, often believing that urgency justifies risk. The judge did not dismiss her explanation, but he did not accept it as a reason either. Instead, he used it as a teaching moment, one that reached far beyond the details of a single traffic violation. He explained that being late is a part of everyday life. Everyone experiences it. What separates responsible conduct from careless behavior is how people respond to that pressure. In a school zone, where children depend on adults to protect them, impatience carries consequences that extend beyond the driver alone. Speed limits in those areas are not suggestions. They are safeguards built on the assumption that drivers will place public safety above personal convenience. Judge Caprio emphasized that laws are not created to punish people for being human. They exist to reduce harm, to set boundaries that protect lives when judgment or time runs short. The court, he explained, does not measure excuses. It evaluates choices. Choosing to slow down, even when late, reflects awareness and respect for others who share the road. Choosing otherwise reveals priorities. This exchange marked a turning point in the hearing. The discussion moved away from numbers on a citation and toward values. The judge was not asking Olivia to feel embarrassed or defeated. He was asking her to understand that responsibility often appears in ordinary moments, at stop signs, crosswalks, and school zones, long before it ever appears in a courtroom. In that moment, the message was clear. Urgency does not excuse risk, and personal schedules do not outweigh community safety. The law exists to remind drivers that every decision behind the wheel carries meaning. Accountability begins not when something goes wrong, but when someone chooses caution even when no one is watching. As the conversation continued, the focus shifted from the violation itself to a broader issue, perception of influence. Olivia suggested, indirectly at first, that resources and contributions often shape outcomes. The courtroom grew noticeably quiet, not out of shock, but because the statement touched a sensitive truth that courts exist to confront, not accommodate. Judge Caprio responded without raising his voice, choosing clarity over confrontation. He explained that a courtroom is one of the few places in society where influence must stop at the door. The law cannot bend for comfort, reputation, or generosity outside its walls. In the United States, courts derive their authority not from power, but from public trust. That trust exists only when people believe outcomes are decided by facts and conduct, not by connections or status. The judge reminded everyone present that each day, Ordinary citizens enter that same courtroom carrying real burdens. Some miss hourly wages they depend on. Others come without lawyers, trusting the process to treat them fairly. These individuals do not ask for special treatment. They ask for equal treatment. That expectation is the foundation of justice, and protecting it is the court's responsibility. Judge Caprio made it clear that acknowledging influence is not realism, it is surrender. Once courts accept that outcomes can be shaped by wealth, they stop being instruments of justice and become tools of inequality. This moment was not about correcting one defendant's misunderstanding. It was about reaffirming a principle that safeguards democracy itself. The courtroom, he emphasized, belongs to the public, every citizen equally, and its integrity must be defended without exception. Judge Caprio then addressed an idea that often goes unspoken but quietly shapes behavior: respect. He explained that respect is not something demanded by a title, enforced by authority, or granted because of status. It is earned through conduct, especially in moments when someone believes they hold power or advantage. In a courtroom, respect is not about fear. It is about recognizing the shared responsibility that binds everyone present. He spoke calmly, emphasizing that wealth and influence may offer comfort in life, but they do not grant exemption from accountability. When individuals begin to believe that rules are flexible depending on who they are, the foundation of fairness weakens. That belief, if left unchallenged, spreads beyond one person and quietly damages public trust in institutions meant to protect everyone equally. The judge's words were not aimed at humiliation or correction through embarrassment. They were meant to clarify a principle central to American democracy. The law functions only when people believe it applies evenly. Respect for the process ensures that citizens, regardless of background, can stand before the court with confidence that they will be treated fairly, not favorably or harshly based on identity. This moment became one of instruction rather than confrontation. It highlighted that true influence is demonstrated not by avoiding consequences, but by accepting them with maturity. Responsibility, the judge made clear, is not a weakness, it is a measure of character. And in a society governed by laws, character is ultimately what sustains freedom. When the judge delivered the decision, it was clear that the court's purpose was not driven by emotion or spectacle, but by responsibility. The sentence addressed the seriousness of the violation while also offering a path toward growth. Fines were imposed not as a symbol of authority, but as accountability. Mandatory safety education was ordered to reinforce awareness, and driving privileges were temporarily restricted to underline the importance of caution behind the wheel. Each element of the ruling served a specific purpose rooted in prevention rather than punishment. In American courts, especially at the municipal level, the goal is often correction before escalation. The judge made it clear that traffic laws are not minor inconveniences, they are public safety tools. When someone disregards them repeatedly, the court must respond in a way that protects the community while encouraging better choices in the future. This balance, between firmness and fairness, is what gives judicial decisions their legitimacy. The ruling also carried an unspoken message. Accountability cannot be outsourced. No attorney, family name, or financial resource can replace personal responsibility. Standing in that courtroom, Olivia was being treated not as a symbol of privilege, but as an individual whose actions carried consequences. That equality is essential to maintaining trust in the justice system. By choosing measured discipline over excessive force, the court reinforced a core American principle, that the law exists not to dominate citizens, but to guide them. The sentence closed the legal chapter of the case, but it opened a deeper opportunity for reflection, learning, and change. As time passed and the intensity of the courtroom moments settled, reflection began to take its place. Removed from familiar comforts and automatic solutions, Olivia found herself facing something new. Not punishment, but awareness. For the first time, responsibility was not handled by someone else, delayed by influence, or softened by convenience. It was personal, and that realization carried more weight than any fine ever could. She began to understand that laws are not written to inconvenience people or interrupt busy lives. They exist to protect communities, especially the most vulnerable. Speed limits, school zones, and court procedures are not arbitrary rules. They are promises made by society to keep one another safe. When those promises are ignored, trust is damaged, not just in individuals, but in systems meant to serve everyone. In reflecting on her actions, Olivia recognized how easily privilege can blur perspective. When consequences are consistently removed, accountability starts to feel optional. But accountability is not a burden, it is a guide. It teaches awareness, restraint, and empathy. It reminds people that their choices matter beyond their own schedules and priorities. This period of reflection was not about regret alone. It was about understanding how freedom and responsibility are inseparable. In the United States, personal liberty is valued deeply, but it is sustained only when individuals respect the boundaries that protect others. Olivia's experience became a turning point, not because she was forced to comply, but because she finally understood why compliance matters. This story is not ultimately about Olivia Wellington, her background, or even the courtroom where the events unfolded. It is about a principle that sits at the heart of the American justice system: the idea that the law must stand above influence, status, and wealth. Courts are not marketplaces, and justice is not a product to be purchased. They exist to serve the public equally, especially those who have nothing but the law itself to rely on. In cities and small towns across the United States, people enter courtrooms every day carrying fear, hope, and responsibility. Some miss work they cannot afford to miss. Some scrape together money meant for essentials just to pay a citation honestly. What keeps the system alive is their belief that fairness still matters. When a courtroom reinforces that belief, it strengthens public trust. When it fails, trust erodes quickly. Judge Caprio's message was simple but powerful. Money may open doors in many places, but it must never open courtroom outcomes. Character is revealed not when life is easy, but when rules apply equally and excuses no longer work. In that space, conduct becomes the only currency that matters. This moment served as a reminder that justice does not need to be perfect to be meaningful. It needs to be consistent, transparent, and fair. The courtroom did not change that day, but one person's understanding of responsibility did. And sometimes, that is exactly how progress begins. Quietly, firmly, and without compromise.